Hey guys, welcome back to the Pulling Curls podcast. Today on episode 96, we are talking to a graduate. That's right. I've decided to have a few people come on who've taken my class and have some idea of what really helped them have a confident birth. I'm not a huge fan of birth stories, but this is as close as you're going to get on the Pulling Curls podcast. So let's untangle our confident birth. Welcome to the Pulling Curls podcast. I'm Hillary, your curly-headed host on the podcast where we untangle everything from pregnancy, parenting, and home routines. I want you to know that there are no right answers for every family, and I find that simplifying my priorities is almost always the answer. It's tangled, just like my hair. Okay, guys, before we get started, leave a review. You're not going to want to keep this podcast to yourself. It's something you really want to share. And the best way to share it is by leaving a review. Oh, and sharing it on social media. Okay, do both. Sure, whatever. Okay, today's guest is actually getting her PhD in political science at Stanford. She had her little girl Eloise about 8 weeks ago. She is a graduate of the Online Prenatal Class for couples. I want to welcome today's guest, Alejandra Aldridge. Do you feel prepared for your delivery? In just 3 short hours, you can be prepared for the confident, collaborative delivery you want. You'll know what to expect and how to talk with your healthcare team, and there are no boring lessons in this class. I'll use humor, stories from my 20 years in the delivery room to engage both of you. I love how Alyssa told me that she found herself laughing at things that used to sound scary. Most of all, you guys are going to be on the same page from bump to bassinet. Join the Online Prenatal Class for couples today. You can save 15% with coupon code UNTANGLED. You can find the link in the show notes. Hey, Alejandra, welcome to the Pulling Curls podcast.
Hi, so great to be here.
Yeah. Okay, so you took the prenatal class and you had your baby how long ago?
Almost 8 weeks ago, February. About 8 weeks ago.
Nice. 8 weeks are you getting used to each other?
Yeah, definitely. Like by about 4 weeks, I knew her like physically, like, okay, I know how to like change diapers and I can like recognize her cues a little better. But in the last like couple weeks, I feel like I've been able to, it's like more so clicked that I'm her mom now and like adjusting myself mentally and emotionally to like motherhood. And so now at this point, obviously all the kinks aren't worked out, but it definitely feels like, okay, we know what we're doing and we're kind of getting in a groove.
Well, my oldest is 21, or he's going to be 21, and the kinks aren't still worked out. But I love that. I think that's good advice for all moms because at the beginning you're like, we are never going to mesh.
Yeah. Well, and like some people talk about how like, oh, the baby came out and I just felt that immediate connection of like, I knew you this whole time. And I was super happy when she came out, but I didn't feel that like I've known you my whole life type feeling. Like I really didn't. And our baby actually had to spend a couple of days in the hospital extra. And so she was 5 days old when she came home. So even in the hospital, we took a couple of days to name her because she wasn't hanging out in our room all the time. And so our families were like, what's her name? What's her name? And we were like, we're not even, it's like, I feel like it's a little easier when you're like, you get to stare at her and just be like, is her name this or this? And she was off in another room and we only saw her for, parts of the day. And so it took a little more time than I thought, but like, yeah, now I feel like I know her and who she is and stuff like that.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's really true when they're in the NICU, although I'm the worst namer ever. So who knows? We backed out of a name. I mean, I hadn't fully written it on the birth certificate. But we changed a name. I will not share which child that was.
My parents so I'm the third of 5 girls. They got 2 of the 5 names wrong on the birth certificate. And so that was like the big thing for us. I was like, we are getting this right. And I'm one of those 5. So I've had to do 2 legal name changes in my life, once for my initial name and then second time when I got married. So I've done the whole like social security, driver's license, all that stuff twice. So I'm like, we're only doing this once for this kid. If she wants to change it herself, she can, but I'm not taking responsibility for this.
Man, they made that mistake more than once. I get one time, but you'd think next time you're real more cautious.
Yeah, on the first one, my dad forgot the last letter of my sister's name. And then on me, they named me Alexandra, but they always called me Alejandra at home. My dad's from Argentina, and so they wanted to give me a Spanish name, but they wrote Alexandra, but they always called me Alejandra. So they didn't get it wrong per se, but I went by Alejandra my whole life. And so by like 16, I was like, let's just change this. So it's real because it said Alexandra even on, or I said Alejandra even on some medical records and like school records, even though it wasn't my legal name. And then we go to change it. And we actually learned my middle name wasn't on my birth certificate either, but it's my middle name now. So it was kind of a mess. We fixed that with her.
I will say that the birth certificate is a lot of pressure that you're not really prepared for. Maybe I should add a section in my class about filling out your birth certificate. Get it together, people. I have a friend who wanted to change her girl's name and decided it was too expensive. And so they just call her something different. And I'm like, and it's like,
it's your solution.
It's not even close. It's nowhere near the other name. And I was like, okay, sure. I guess she's like, she can just deal with it when she's an adult. It's fine. So, all right. What do you think you did to prepare for your confident birth? What were 3 things you think that helped you feel confident in the labor room?
Okay, so number 1 was knowing logistically what would happen. And I think this came from a couple different areas. So one was the prenatal class was super helpful and just talking about like, okay, so you're going to arrive and this is generally the procedures that are going to happen and they're going to ask you these questions or things like that. Just kind of logistically, I'm probably, you'd say type A. I like knowing what's going to happen and having a plan. And so sort of knowing what would happen was helpful. Obviously in the time of COVID, hospital tours aren't a thing right now, but our hospital offered a virtual tour. We never actually got to take the virtual tour because I got emergency induced before the virtual tour happened. But the good thing was that we actually had to make a visit to labor and delivery when I was about 35 weeks because I started showing signs of preeclampsia. So we had a Saturday night at midnight labor and delivery visit. So even though it wasn't normal, and we didn't get to the hospital tour, it was actually super helpful because both me and my husband got to see where labor and delivery was ahead of time. Fast forward 2 weeks and I got emergency admitted to the hospital for an emergency induction. And if it wasn't for like my husband and I logistically knowing where L&D was, so like I went to the hospital, I went for an NST and then I got admitted. My husband was still at home. He was working. And so he didn't come for a couple hours later because he had to finish things off at home. But I wasn't stressed out about like having to explain to him, go up this floor, turn around here, here's how you get your COVID pass or all this other stuff because we had happened to go to labor and delivery before. Obviously, that's not everyone's situation, but simply knowing logistically what would happen typically happens through like a hospital tour, virtual or in person, was super, super helpful. And knowing combined with the class of just like, okay, here's physically where you park and here's like how you get in. And then adding with just like, okay, the nurses are this is kind of the procedure that's going to happen when you first get in was super helpful because I like having a plan. And so it was helpful to not be so worried about like what's going to happen next.
Yeah, I really like that too, which is probably why I go through it like step by step in my class. I appreciate that kind of thing. I even like before I go to Home Depot, I want to know which bin and which aisle my lumber is on.
Yes, same. I look it up online and I want to know like aisle 5, bin 12 or whatever it is. Yep.
Yeah, because I want to get in and get out. Totally true on tours. A lot of hospitals are offering them virtual. It's funny that they didn't have like a recorded virtual tour that you could just watch whenever. So that's funny.
Yeah. The way they do it here is they have like a live one with like you sign up for a Zoom class with the purpose that you get to ask questions with the person afterwards. So in theory, it's a great idea. And they want you to sign up for they do once a month and they want you to sign up for like the one closest to your birth because they don't want parents who are like 4 months along taking spots for parents who are like 8 months along. Like they want to, spread it out a little bit. But just the timing of ours, we were literally in the hospital when our tour was supposed to happen.
And that's another tip also is if you come in just for an NST, that nurse is free game for whatever you want to ask her. Because once she's admitted you, she can answer like all of your questions because she does know your health history. Like, you guys all know me that I'm like, this is just for educational purposes only, blah, blah, blah. But once she is your nurse, she can answer all the questions. She can tell you the best place to park because hospitals are insane for parking, especially once you get in, you don't even know what door you're close to. So I just ask away. Yeah, if you have an NST or any scheduled stuff, ask the nurses. We love to talk while we type because otherwise we're just typing. Yeah. Okay, what else helped you feel confident in the labor room?
Okay, number 2 was knowing how to get through pain. And specifically, the pain management section from the prenatal class was really helpful. And specifically, the breathing techniques you talked about. So I wasn't like going in, I said, I'm probably going to I'm going to use pain medication. I wasn't trying to have a non-medicated birth, but I kind of wanted to see how I started non-medicated. I wasn't like, check me and get the epidural right away. It was sort of, let's see how far we progress before we go to the epidural. But what was really helpful was in the prenatal class, you talked about all of the pain management options. So I felt really prepared once I went to the hospital. I did have in my head, I think I'm going to go for the epidural instead of choosing to go for the IV pain meds, or they actually offered me the laughing gas in the hospital, which you had talked about that some hospitals are doing, some aren't. And they also were doing a study. I did not opt in, but it was a study where you could use laughing gas and VR, and you could like stare at fishes or something like that.
Wow.
And yeah, so I chose not to. I couldn't quite decide. I couldn't wrap my head around the idea of like birthing while staring at fishes. I feel like that just
when do you take that off,
right? Like, I just feel like that would have been a weird experience, so I chose not to. But knowing all of my options ahead of time made it great, so that once I walked into the hospital, like I had in my head, I'm going to aim for the epidural. And they offered me all the same pain medications, but I was able to, like, I just kind of already had that in my head. I didn't have to decide in the moment in the hospital, especially since I ended up giving birth at 37 weeks, much earlier than we anticipated.
A lot of people are like, I'm just going to use IV pain medication and I'm going to use it from 1 centimeter. And I'm always like, hold Nelly, that ain't going to do you from 1 centimeter on, and I think it's just important to know the goods and the bads about all of those things. But I want to deliver in the fish tank now.
Well, yeah. And specifically with the IV meds, for example, I ended up having a really long birth from when they started the induction to when baby was born was 40 hours. And so it was like, you can't get through that with IV meds. Nope. It wouldn't have worked. And I actually had to get a second epidural just because I had an epidural for about 24 hours. And epidurals can do that. They just like stop working after a certain point. But I'm glad that I'd made that choice as well. Personally, for me, it was a good one because I could not have made it through that with just IV pain meds. Probably laughing gas I would have gotten tired of by the end of doing that for 40 hours. So I was glad I made that choice, but also had that in mind and I was glad I made the epidural choice because I knew it would be a long labor. Like when I went in at 37 weeks, this was my first baby, -3, 0 centimeters, 0% effaced. Like baby was not even close to being ready to come out. So I knew this would be a long process. And so knowing the logistics of IV pain meds won't last you super long or all these other things helped me eliminate as well. Like, okay, epidural's likely my best shot at long-term pain management.
And I mean, I have seen a few like super long inductions, but mom is just so tired after. And so, yeah, if you're going in at 37 weeks, you really want to consider what you can really manage and what you'll be able to sleep through, what you'll be able to get some rest, because you can't be awake for 40 hours and then have a baby and then be awake for 18 years. You need a nap somewhere in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I had preeclampsia, which is like connected to blood pressure. They had to check my blood pressure all the time. And I think it went off every like 30 minutes or something. Like it wasn't just like the normal vitals at the nurse shift change. They checked it all the time for good reason. And I'm glad they did because it was very high. But I got very good at basically just like sleeping through the blood pressure cuff going off because it was going to go off at 2 a.m. And so I might as well try to sleep through it.
Yeah. It just becomes part of your body at a certain point.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have one more thing that helped you be confident?
Yes. My last one was knowing that my husband knew what was going on because we took the class together. And what I mean by that is, again, I'm like very like type A. I like to know what's going on. But I also, so like if I plan a trip, if I'm somehow responsible for planning a trip with other people, I feel responsible the whole time. Are they having a good time? Do they feel comfortable, etc.? And so I didn't realize it till after, and I was talking to my husband prepping some notes for this conversation, and he mentioned, I didn't know how much I didn't know until I took the prenatal class as a guy. As a girl, often you have sisters, friends, you follow more mom Instagrams probably or whatever. So you're just like a little bit more aware of what happens in birth. There was still a ton I learned, but I just knew more naturally than he did. But I realized afterwards, I was so grateful he knew all he did because I never at any point felt like the nurse was going to come in, talk to me, I was going to have a conversation, and then have to like backwards explain it to my husband. Like he knew all the terminology and like all the options and everything like that. A lot of the prompts were really helpful from the prenatal class because it asks you questions like, here's a time to discuss this with your spouse. So we weren't having to do any discussing in the hospital. I honestly don't think there were any conversations we had to make during the labor and delivery that we hadn't already made before because we just talked through lots of options. Obviously, our birth plan, I mean, I didn't have a super close one, but I did not plan to go in at 37 weeks unexpectedly. So that like, there was lots that happened that we weren't expecting. But having my husband or like your partner or support person or whatever, knowing what was going to happen and be knowledgeable themselves made it so much better because I wasn't worried about having to make decisions myself or explain it or feel like I wasn't explaining things well enough. That made it such a fantastic experience.
Yeah, I love that. So back in 2014, when I was like, what angle do I want to take for this prenatal class? I knew that I wanted partners to be just as engaged in the learning and all of it so that they knew what was going on, because I feel bad for dads who have literally no idea what's going on. It's scary for them. So, I love moms, but I love dads too.
Yeah. He even said that like when I said, hey, I think we should take a prenatal class, he was like, do we really, what else is there to know, and even when we kind of started it, like right in the beginning, he was like, I don't know if I need this, blah, blah, blah. But then as we kept going, he was like, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that can happen. Oh, that can happen. Like, or even just talking about things like whether it's in the class or we were just talking that like inductions can take a really long time, baby's not just going to pop out, or how big is 10 centimeters actually, like all these things. When you start like putting it in your head, you're like, oh, that baby's going to go through that. You don't really like think about it until you're forced to. And so, yeah, he said he learned a ton that he thought he might have been fine otherwise, but he was also really glad that he took the class because there's just a lot he didn't know.
Yeah. And I also try and make it really short so that dads aren't like tapping out midway.
Yeah, no, and we both work. And so being able to do we would do like 1 or 2 videos a night or something like that and just kind of like slowly work through it. So we were both engaged through the class the whole time.
Yeah. I mean, I'm the worst at I disengage after about 15 minutes of anything. So I feel everyone's pain. I was like, we have to make these videos short. So yeah, I love that. What did you learn about yourself during labor and delivery?
I think, so when, Eloise is our daughter's name, when she came out and they put her on my chest, like the first thought that popped in my head was, I did it. Like I did this thing. And I knew it was going to happen. Like when you're 9 months pregnant, this thing is happening. There's no backing out now. But I think the biggest thing was just that I could get through it. And I feel like I typically am a person that has a lot of grit in general and can push through a lot of things. But labor and delivery is no joke. And doing it for 40 hours after I was from when I went to my NST. So yeah, I went in for an NST, got they said your blood pressure is too high. We have to take you to labor and delivery. I was literally 1 point up, over the threshold. And they're like, we have to take you to labor and delivery. I'm sorry. I was like, okay. So they take me, they do blood work. They're like, yeah, we got to induce you today. But so from that point to when baby was born was 55 hours. So it was just emotionally and mentally a really long time. But yeah, I think just knowing through that whole process, oh, I did it. And having this, the stamina through the whole thing, I was really proud of myself for I feel like I handled a lot of it really well and was, yeah, I think really proud of myself for handling all that craziness with a pretty level head and just being okay, we're doing this. Let's get the baby out.
Yeah, I love that because I think a lot of moms at the very end if you're going naturally, there is a huge amount of pain relief, but I also think there's a huge psychological relief that it is over, like the marathon, which of course it isn't over because you only have to raise up for the rest of forever, but that part is over. You finished that part of the marathon. It is so, yeah. You guys, once you experience that, you're like, I'm just so glad that I'm done pushing to have this baby out. It's amazing. So yes, it's such an accomplishment to grow another human inside of you and then push it out.
Yeah. Even still, sometimes I'll look at her and be like, I made you. I still can't click that I made you inside of me, but I did somehow.
Yeah. When my kids when I'm like, I need you to clean that toilet better. They go, why? And I'm like, because I grew your entire body inside mine. Get down there and clean that toilet.
I love that.
My 16-year-old loves that. He loves to hear a lot about living inside my body.
Just the relief is real when baby comes out. I had a lot in your class and podcast. You talk about the last month, you're super sore. You're just feeling so pregnant. Because I got induced at 37 weeks, I was only beginning to feel that I'm so pregnant feeling. I was feeling it, but I didn't have to do it for another month till 41 weeks or something. And I have to admit, I'm a little scared now for a future pregnancy when they're like, oh, you're good. We're just going to let you go to the end. I don't know if I can make it to 40 weeks at this point because I feel like I got a little spoiled with getting out at 37.
Well, I mean, everything's a trade-off, right? Quicker labor, 4 more weeks of misery. It's hard to say.
It's true. Yeah.
All right. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for taking the class. We appreciate it when people support a small business. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. I think so often going into the hospital is just kind of a nebulous blur about what to expect, but I really like what I said. I like to know which bin and which number at Home Depot so that I can grab my stuff. I like to give you that same reference when you take a prenatal class. So hopefully this gave you guys some ideas of what to expect and how to prepare for your confident delivery. And of course, a big thanks for Alejandra for coming on. It's really nice to get a birth experience of someone who had a positive experience, especially of a 37-week induction at the hospital, who came out with such a great little baby. So congratulations, Alejandra. You're going to be a great mom. Thanks so much for joining us today. I hope we helped smooth out a few of the snarls in your life. We drop an episode every Monday, and we always appreciate it when you guys share and review. Until next time, we hope you have a tangle-free day.